years later, everything Michael Jackson said would happen is happening because we are with United Artists Records. My mother looks at us and says, "Your stepfather has been molesting your sisters for years. Have you ever wondered what a brother experiences emotionally once we learn our sisters have been sexually abused?"
Welcome to the Wheel With It podcast with your host, Devon. Let's get into the episode.
Hello. My name is Devon Wieters. Welcome to another episode of Wheel With It. I just wanted to say a few things about this podcast before we get started. First, it's not for young ears, so if you have kids in the car, I would highly recommend that you either skip this one or listen to it when the kids are not in the car, because we do talk about some sexual abuse stuff. Just wanted to give you a heads up, but this conversation is so fascinating. Keeper was such a cool guy and such a nice guy, and his life story is just absolutely fascinating. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one, even though it's tough in some areas. But again, not for young ears. And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, all the things. So now, with that, let's get into the conversation with Keeper. Hello. My name is Devon Wieters. Welcome to another episode of Wheel With It. We are back after a long break, but I am honored to have Keeper Catran-Whitney on the podcast with us today. How are you, Keeper?
I am fantastic. How are you today?
Good. Is that your real name?
Keeper is a nickname. People have been calling me that for decades, and that's just what everyone calls me.
That
So,
is
yes,
that is such a cool name. You get the cool name award for. So tell us about yourself as much as you're comfortable with, because you have a very sensitive story that we will be talking about today. So this podcast is probably not for young ears. I just want to say that off the top. But tell us about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
absolutely. As you said, my name is Keeper Catran-Whitney. I am the author of the book Helplessness, the emotional health challenges brothers experience once we learn our sisters have been sexually abused by our parents. And as you said, this is a very sensitive topic. It usually is not for young ears. However, I have to say, of late, I have been on a number of podcasts as a guest for teenagers who want to explore this topic because it's happening in their schools, it's happening in their homes. The story is told from a brother's perspective, what happens for us emotionally, what we deal with. And usually I start out by asking a very simple question. And it's this: have you ever wondered what a brother experiences emotionally once we learn our sisters have been sexually abused? Most people are going to say, no, I've never even given it any thought. And my response is, don't worry. You're not alone, but you're about to learn. You're about to find out. Through my family story and the experience of me and my 7 siblings, you're going to learn some things. And it is very sensitive. And because of the nature of the conversation, protect yourself emotionally at all times. Pull away, step back if you have to. Will It podcast will be here. You can always come back to it
Yes,
because there may
we
be
will
some
be
things in it.
here. We've
Yeah.
gone with literally, I make no money off this. This is a hobby. I've literally had 2 listeners to an episode before, so it will not offend me if you step back and take the time you need, because this is a very sensitive topic. Tell us just about your childhood and how you found all this out, and we'll go from there.
Sure, sure. In 1971, my family, we were very poor. We were living in abject poverty. We could barely pay an $80 or $90 a month rent. My family consists of 10 people: my mother, my stepfather, the four boys, of which I have one, obviously, and my 4 sisters. And I went to 11 grade schools before I graduated high school. I lived in 21 different places.
Whoa.
Yes, I lived in 21 different places before I moved out. Homeless, 3. So I know what it's like to have that kind of life growing up. My mother, who was a great singer, decided that she was going to get together with her brother and sister and form a group. And as great as they were, they could not make enough money to make ends meet. So in 1971, Michael Jackson 5, they're everywhere. They are all over the globe. You're hearing ABC, Who's Loving You? I Want You Back. They are everywhere. And
Yes.
so my mother, yes,
The Jackson Five was remarkable because you still recognize their songs today, and it was like,
oh yeah,
what?
yeah. And this is before Michael Jackson becomes
Yeah.
the king of pop. So my mother hears us singing around the house, and she asked, "Would you kids like to sing? Because as a singing family, we can make more money." So of course, we said, "Yeah." The next thing we are singing in after-hour nightclubs all over Los Angeles. We are singing at 2 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the morning, all over Los Angeles. And we do that. We rehearse. We go to school and we get up and we repeat. One Saturday, we are rehearsing in the phone. My mother answers the phone and says, "Hello? Say that again? Hold on." And then she looks at us kids while we're rehearsing and says, "Michael Jackson's on the phone."
What the?
Yeah, exactly. That was our reaction. And he asked to speak to the brother under me, brother number 4. And my brother gets on the phone and says, he's all excited, "Hello?" Uh-huh. And then soon after he hangs up and he screams, "Michael Jackson said he's heard of us. He heard
The
us sing and dance just like him."
oh my
And
gosh. Okay.
yes. And he says, "For us to keep going, we will get there someday. We will make it big. Just keep going." We keep going. And now 6 years later, it's 1970s. We are everywhere. We're doing concerts. We're doing TV shows. We're magazines. We made the Billboard Top 100 3 times that.
Oh, holy
And yeah, six
cow.
years later, everything Michael Jackson said would happen is happening because we are with United Artists Records. 77 is also the year Motown finishes an exhaustive 3 year search to replace Michael Jackson and Jackson 5, who they had lost earlier to Epic Records. And guess who they chose? We were the family to replace them. We
Oh,
were, yeah.
you definitely get the award for most fascinating story because wow, I did not expect that.
We haven't gotten to the part yet.
Yes, there's a not good part in there, but as far as good parts too, you get the good part award too because
It was an exciting time for us. Here we are poor. The house that we're living in is being paid for by United Artists Records, and they're paying for our food, and they're paying for our clothes, they're paying for everything because we were reaching fame, but we did not have any money. But we were getting there, and what Michael Jackson said was about to happen. And so Motown comes to us and offers us the largest new artist contract they offered anybody, larger than the Jackson 5, larger than the Supreme, larger than the Four Tops, larger than anyone.
holy
And,
shoot. Okay.
and so that week that we are to sign this contract, a few days before, my oldest sister screams upstairs, "Boys, come downstairs, family meeting." We all come running downstairs. I'm the last kid to enter. And when I enter, I notice on the couch my 3 youngest sisters are huddled together and they're not saying a word, which was really odd because all they did was laugh and joke and tease everybody. That's all they ever did. But they're sitting in a corner not saying a word. My 2 youngest brothers are sitting at the opposite end of the couch and they are quiet, but they're like me. They're like, "What's going on? Why aren't the girls saying anything? We are about to become famous. We are about to become rich. We're going to learn what day we're going to sign this contract." As I entered the living room, my oldest sister's pacing back and forth in front of the entryway. And she is, "I have no idea, but this is what I do know." Earlier Saturday morning, my 4 sisters and my mother were going from room to room arguing about something. Not a clue. I just figured it was the girls doing what they do. They're arguing. My oldest sister got into an argument with my mom. Okay, it's what they do. So I'm figuring, okay, that's why they're quiet. Whatever. I take a seat. My older brother is standing at the far end of the couch, and he, like me, has no idea. And then within seconds, my mother and stepfather enter the living room. My stepfather is 6 foot. He's huge. He's a big dude. He's 250 pounds. And he wore this huge afro wig that put his height at over 7 feet tall. So he's a mountain of a man. We have a brown recliner that sits in the middle of the living room. He immediately sits down in it and bends over and puts his face in his hands like this. And I'm wondering, what's the deal? Is he sick or something? Why did he do that? My mother walks right behind him, but then she stands in the middle of the living room and she looks at her 8 kids, the seven of us by the couch and sitting on the couch, and my oldest sister who is still pacing back and forth. But when she looks at my sister, who's the oldest one, she's child number three, the oldest of the girls, if looks could kill, she would have killed her. And if my older sister could have killed her with her looks, she would have killed my mom. Something is wrong. The girls know, but we four boys don't have a clue. But we are about to find out.
Yeah.
Emotional earthquake. I live in California. We have earthquakes all the time. They break freeways. What else? Houses crack, trees are uprooted. Those are material earthquakes. You can put those things back together. Some rebar, some nails, some hammer, pop, everything goes back together. Not a problem. Get back on the streets, drive, go back in the house, not a problem. Those are material. My brothers and I are about to be hit with three emotional earthquakes in less than 10 minutes. And when you're hit with an emotional earthquake, I'm about 16 or 17. I'm still very young. And I just hung with my brothers and sisters all the time. We were very tight, the eight of us. In fact, my mother had all eight of us by the time she was.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
My friends had people I graduated from high school with. None of the people that I was really close with and still hang out with today have kids. But the people that I'm like friends on Facebook with or whatever that have kids, I think two's a lot at 24. Eight's like how? I don't.
I told my mom, you were always on your back. And her response was, baby, I never had a headache. I'm like, that's obvious. You never said no. Yeah, that's how close we are, my brothers and sisters. We did everything together. We played together. We sang together. We watched movies together. We did everything together. So we're very tight. And the earthquakes emotionally that we are about to be hit with, and understand for those of you listening, those of you watching, what we're about to get into, as I said, can be very triggering because the subject is child sexual abuse. It can be very triggering. So let me now go into what me and my three brothers were hit with. Earthquake number one, emotionally. My mother looks at us and says, your stepfather has been molesting your sisters for years. I'm a brother. I don't know what to do. I'm in shock and disbelief. Emotionally, I am dropping. I am slow on the uptake because she's continuing to talk, but my world has just been rocked. And I'm catching a few words. I'm hearing liquor store and I'm hearing park. I'm hearing someone's apartment and I'm hearing this sister and that sister, but I don't know what to do. My family is so tight. And to get this kind of news, it's the news no brother could ever prepare, we ever expect to hear. And then she hits us with another earthquake. She says, I have known all along. You've known what all along? She has known that this has been going on between my stepfather and her four daughters since the beginning. In fact, it started in 1971, the year Michael Jackson called our house. My three youngest sisters, who are the three youngest of us, by the two twins, or the twins, redundant, the twins, girls, are 5 years old. The sister directly above them is 6 years old. And my oldest sister, when he started with her, she was 11. This is what they were arguing about all morning. It's time to tell the boy, before we sign this contract, they need to know what has been going on, this deep, dark family secret. And so my brothers and I are being hit with this. We are dropping. We don't know what to do. Our world is breaking apart. And then we are hit with earthquake number three. My oldest sister, child number three, looks at her four brothers and says, and it took me a long time to understand this. It took me years to understand what was going on here because I didn't know why she would say this to us. But she looked at us and says, you boys can't talk about it. It didn't happen to you. It only happened to us girls. Nothing happened to you boys. Don't tell anybody. And when you're so close to brothers and sisters like we were, and you're told by the people you need to speak to the most who could help you understand that you can't talk about it, which is to say, your feelings don't matter. You don't matter. You have to deal with this, however you're going to deal with it. We were hit with it. And so my book talks about what brothers go through when we cannot have these conversations with our sisters once we learn that they have been sexually abused, either inside the home, outside the home, the burdens that we carry emotionally, the shame and the guilt and the stigma, and how you come back from that and how you can reconnect with your sisters, what took me 45 years to do. That is the framework for our discussion. and what I talk about. Because my goal is to bring brothers into the conversation, to elevate our voices, to let people know we are in pain and that we are carrying a lot of trauma.
So, for sharing that, by the way, tell us about, I guess, what the reconnection process was like, writing the book and everything,
Mhm.
and what you do now.
What I do now is I talk on the subject of child sexual abuse where you bring brothers into the conversation. That's what I do now. Because in 1977, when we learned about this, you could go to a library and you could find articles and books, and every now and then you'd get a movie or a documentary from a woman's perspective about what they had been dealing with. There was nothing for brothers. We are just left holding the emotional baggage, the emotional trauma, the psychological and the emotional impact is devastating on us. And so, what I do now through Helplessness, which is book one of a three-book series, from helplessness to hopefulness to happiness, is talk about the fear and anxiety and confusion that brothers experience. Because when, like I said, when we are told we can't talk about it, what we hear is that we don't matter. And so that's 1977. Today, there are still no tools and systems in place to help brothers deal with the fact that our self-esteem has been under attack, our self-worth is under attack. And the people who could help us have told us to go away. And in the process, we become taboo. We become an inconvenient truth. No one wants to talk about the brothers, from the predator to the people that empower them to the victims. There's discussion, but there's always collateral damage in a family. There's always a family. If one person is sexually abused, the entire family is sexually abused. And when it comes out, everyone's needs and emotional stresses need to be addressed. And oftentimes, the brothers, we have nowhere to go, even today. There are no books and magazines and articles and 12-step programs. There's not even a one-step program. So my mission is to bring us into the conversation. It took me a long time to figure out how to work through my trauma and my guilt at not knowing and finding a way back to my sisters. It took about 45 years.
What do we need to have in place to help families and siblings of victims?
What you find today is you can go to family therapists, you can go to counseling, and they will look at it from a family dynamic, which needs to be dealt with. And there are tools and systems in place, not only for women, but for men who have been direct victims of sexual abuse. What is not in place are the rest of the siblings. There's nothing for us, and especially for brothers. See, when my sister, older sister, said you can't talk about it, as I said, I didn't understand it immediately because all I knew was that I just saw my family break apart and things happened so quickly. My mother, as soon as my older sister said what she said, she got my stepfather out of the room by faking a heart attack because here you have four brothers who are young as we were, could start to put things together, could start to say, we are going to deal with him. But even that causes some additional, rather causes a lot of additional trauma for everyone. But she got him out of the house. And in the immediate aftermath, you go to your room and you're in this isolation. You're alone and in your head. And the depression, and even though you have these protective ends, again, there's nothing for you. Today, there are no tools for brothers. You can go to a family therapist or a sexual abuse counselor. And I have been, let's see, in the past 3 months, I've been a guest on close to 150 talking about this. And what people say when I tell them is, I never even thought about the brothers because no one ever asked, are you okay? Do you need to talk? Is there anything you need? And for my sister to say what she said, she was protecting her and protecting my three little sisters. And I get it. I understand it. Of course she does, because historically, what men have done to women since the beginning of time on this topic has been horrific. But there are innocent people who are impacted along the way, and they have to have an opportunity to find the help that they need.
So that's really important what you're saying. Thank you for sharing that again. It's about the reconnection process with your sisters? What was that like?
Yes. So once my sister said that we can't talk about it, a couple of my sisters immediately left and they moved out right away. But everyone else has stayed together because we knew we were still under contract with, it's still with United Artists, at least. But obviously, we did not do the deal with Motown. And so we had to try to keep it going because we still needed to eat. And along the way, as years passed, my brothers and I would hear from our sisters, how come you didn't hear us? How come you didn't see us? The whole process for them was to keep them silent. So as as I began to move forward, my mother would tell us that she will handle this, but she didn't. And quite frankly, when my mother said she will handle this, it meant I didn't have to do anything. And that is a shame and a guilt and a betrayal on my part because I put the two together. My sister said, don't do anything. Don't even lift a finger. Then my mother said she will handle it. But I'm feeling all of this. And you start to go into a dark place because your emotional trauma has not been addressed. When emotional trauma is not addressed, what you are left with is the next step, which is mental health trauma. And with mental health trauma, it becomes logical, it becomes isolation. You're alone, and you start to, in your head, you start to come up with ways to do things that you probably shouldn't do. And for me, the immediate process was it took me 9 years to do something. And this was given once I saw him, my stepfather, 24 hours to do something. Otherwise, I was going to kill him. So my sisters and I, we would maybe see each other on Thanksgiving or Christmas or something like that. But we would hear from them. You didn't do anything. My brothers and I, we didn't even talk to each other about it. And people will ask me, how come? I had already lost my family and we're hanging by a thread, literally hanging by a thread. And all it's going to take is one more incident, one more conversation, and I am cut free and I'm out in the ether. My foundation, the people that keep me grounded have let me go. And so for me and my brothers, that's why we didn't say anything. We didn't want to lose our sisters. So the process of getting back to them was long and hard. And the major factor was we were just afraid. So I decided I wanted to write a book that could explain to other men out there who are experiencing the same thing, and there are many. There are hundreds who are carrying the same burden, that you're not alone. And hopefully, in the process, sisters would read it and say, I had no idea this is what my brother was going through. So, as I was going to write the book, I was so afraid, but I knew I had to tell my sister because I didn't want them to be caught off guard. I knew they were going to be angry, but I needed to do this because I needed to give myself a voice. I needed to find a way to push back. I needed to find a sense of courage and reconnect with my manhood, find my self esteem and self worth. And I figured, okay, if I write this book from a brother's perspective, I could maybe use it to reconnect with my sisters. So I called them, a couple of them before, in fact, three of them before I was going to write the book, and told them this is what I was going to do. And I remember the first conversation with my second sister. I had gone over to her house and I told her what I was going to do. And I'm waiting for all of this anger. This is around this is 2013. And I'm standing out in front of her house and I'm crying because I know what she's going to say. How dare you? Who do you think you are? You know you boys can't talk about this. It didn't happen to you, but it did. It happened to all of us. Me and my brothers just didn't know it was happening to us. So it requires a lot of courage to find the emotional strength and wherewithal to go talk to our sisters about it. And she said, of course you should write it. All you boys should write it. I'm like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You said don't write it. Don't say anything. But time has a way of healing. And my other sisters were pretty much the same way. So that's what gave me the strength and the courage to write the book and feel confident that I would not lose my sisters in the process.
That's really cool that they gave you their blessing to do that. That must have been hard for them too.
I found it yes and no. And understand, I wasn't looking for permission and I wasn't looking for their blessing because I'm going to do this anyway, because I need to be able to heal myself. And I figured if I wrote the book, it could possibly help us heal together. And not only that, it meant my family's tragedy could be something that didn't end in tragedy. It could be something that ended by helping other people, other brothers and other families and other sisters understand. So it wasn't about getting their blessing. As I said, I'm doing it anyway. But the fact that the three that I did communicate with and would continue and was willing to talk to me said, yes, you should absolutely write this. Man, it told me I didn't have to wait 45 years. I could have gone to them earlier, but I was so afraid of losing them forever. And that's the limbo brothers get stuck in. We're in this emotional purgatory. And it's one of those things that when you're told you can't do something and yet you hear it, it's a paradox. We cannot talk about what happened, but we're expected to answer for our non-participation in the conversation. You're not brought into it, but you're expected to answer for not being in it. And those things should not exist in the same space, but they do. So what I found, the greatest strength that I got then released me from a lot of pain and trauma was finding the courage to actually talk about it. So much just went away. I was no longer trapped by what my sister said. I was no longer trapped with the knowledge of what my mother allowed to happen and what my stepfather did. I started to reclaim my own space and my own person. And it became incredibly empowering. And finding that voice is not easy to do.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a really tough journey, and thank you for taking it because now you're here. What's your relationship with your mother?
I don't have a relationship with my mother right now. And had alluded to it took me 9 years to do something. And part of the reason why, as I said, is because she said she would handle it. But it got to be 9 years because I was going to get married in 1986, 9 years after. And I just started to go into a dark place because I hadn't done any. And so I dealt with my stepfather. And luckily, he heeded my warning and stopped coming around because I was getting ready to kill him. He was going to be dead,
Yeah,
or he was going to kill me. But
I would be
I
too.
know
So no shade.
but I have very little conversation with my mom, very little. And so she did ask, can I make your wedding cake? Okay, fine. Can I sew your tie? Okay, fine. I'm thinking, oh, all right. Coming into the wedding, my mother was all about image. And I know when I get married, I'm going to have children, of which I have two. I've been married 38 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I told my fiance at the time, if we have children, I want them to know their grandmother because I don't want to go through what I went through and not see my grandmothers for decades, which is what we went through growing up. We didn't see our grandparents for decades over some nonsense. And I didn't want to repeat that. So I told her, I'm going to offer my mother an olive, and hopefully she won't betray us again. Hopefully she'll see what's more important is the emotional health of her children. So what I did, and this was pretty much the last straw for me, about 3 weeks before my wedding, I went to my mother and I said, okay, look, I know we're not talking much. There's really nothing here. If we have children, I want them to know you. This is what I'm going to do. Know that we do not want our stepdad there because my mother was all about image still. Image was her thing. She did not want to not be without a man for when we were around friends. It was weird. So I said, know that we do not want him here in this wedding, but if you want to invite him, you can. But know that we do not want him. So I figured, okay, this is an olive branch. You'll see that I'm trying to recreate a relationship. Of course, he's not going to come. But now, what that you've done, what you've just done, okay, maybe we can build on that. Maybe the family can come back together in a more positive way. But I realized in that moment, based on her answer, I had done the wrong thing. She said, let me think about it. And I knew what I had done because I stick to my word as best I can and I live with the consequences. And so where he was gone, she invites him to be in the wedding. And the son that got him out is responsible for putting him back in front of his sister. And that is what drove three of my sisters to not talk to me for 20 years because they didn't know I was the one that got him out in the first place.
Got
I
him
never
out of
told,
got him out of what? Where?
got him out of our lives.
Okay.
When I threatened to kill him. And I didn't tell anyone what I had done. They all assumed it was my mother, and I didn't tell them because I didn't think it was important. I was just doing what a brother was supposed to do, what this brother was supposed to do. Because to me, the definition of a brother with sisters is you protect their honor, and I had not done that. And so I was willing to put my life on the line to do whatever was necessary to get him from being around. But after doing that, because I had gone to this mental place where I was losing weight and I was just really, really angry with myself and not talking much, I said to myself, okay, let me try to do something that could help the family and make and offer my mother this olive branch. What I did was break things even further. And so that's why we did not talk for as long as we did. But I have to say, in writing Helpless and them saying, yes, you should write it, I went back to them and asked an outlandish question about the book. I asked a question that I knew they would say, hell no. I asked each of the three of them, would you be willing to write a chapter in the book? Tell it from your perspective, whatever you want to say. Attack me, do whatever you want, because I think your voice in the book, even though it's from a brother's perspective, would lend a lot of positive, could be a very positive influence for other sisters reading it because they would be able to say, oh, his sisters contributed to the book. What are they saying about what happened? And then, so the three of them said yes, and two brothers said yes. Oftentimes, when I talk and do events and things, there's usually a woman who will ask, who will say to me, Keeper, your sisters were right. It didn't happen to you boys, it did happen to them. I do the thing that if it happened to one person in the family, it happened to all of us. And I'll say, yeah. And so she says, so it had nothing to do with you. You can't talk about it. And then I tell them this. 6 years before my sisters were sexually abused by our 71, my older brother and I, we were sexually abused by our babysitter almost daily for 6 months. In 1960, I was 6 years old. My older brother was seven. So I do understand what my sisters were going through. And what that does is it gives me and those reading the book, because the entire story is in the book, they begin to understand, oh, he does understand. And women have told me hundreds, oh, you do get it. You do understand. And the challenge, we should not be having this ratio contest whose trauma is worse, the direct victims versus the indirect victim, the women versus the men. My trauma is worse because I'm a woman and you're a guy. There's this battle that takes place all the time around child sexual abuse. We cannot afford to have that kind of battle. We have to find our allies wherever we can. And we need to be able to bring those people who can elevate our voices so we can get legislation. We can inform law enforcement. We can inform schools and teachers and our religious leaders. These are the things and type of tools that we need to have created for.
Yeah, that's really good that you're doing that. What do you wish law enforcement and people knew about sexual abuse?
Oftentimes, and you can ask anyone who suffered from sexual abuse, it's not just children, that when you talk about it, the immediate reaction usually is that can't be true, especially with women. It happens all the time. No,
She's probably being dramatic. That's
exactly. Oh, you misunderstood. That's not what he was doing. Women suffer that all the time. And I know it's wrong because I have my youngest brother to this day tells me that his 5-year-old sister seduced our stepfather. He still doesn't believe it. And so even at children's age, that happened. And so what law enforcement and legislation, legislative leaders, political leaders need to understand, we don't bring up this conversation lightly. It's hard to admit it because we know the stigma that we're going to be up against. We know the shame of other people knowing and other people saying, oh, you misunderstood. Oh, and if it's a woman, girl, I would have done this. Dude, I would have done that. No, you don't know what you would have done. And we need to be able to have the conversation that is more about truth than trying to protect the predators and those people who empower them, which is usually what happens initially. There's this, and as you so rightfully pointed out, women get so much pushback, as do children. So unless we're going to have an honest conversation, I think the best conversation that happens is when we can bring men and women together, those who are come together in allyship as opposed to being enemies, which is often the case. See, me and my brothers, we were guilty from our sister's perspective because what was between my stepdad's legs is what's between our legs, which kind of made us guilty by gender proximity, if you will. We can't afford to have those kind of conversations. They do not serve. We need to create allies wherever we can. And then we need to raise our voices in unison whenever, however, and for as loud as we can. Otherwise, we are all going to be overlooked in this conversation.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. I've had a very supportive family growing up and stuff. So not at the hands of my family, but I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. It was long distance, so I never got physically harmed or anything like that. But my parents were very supportive and all that. So I'm not saying they didn't believe me or anything, but at a certain point, you don't know like how bad emotional abuse is because you haven't really lived it, kind of thing. So
Yes.
even if it is long distance, it still haunts you. It's still bad. So
Absolutely. And you mentioned there's the emotional abuse, there's a psychological abuse. It doesn't need to, you don't always need to be in the same room with the person to be abused. Like you're saying, a long distance relationship, there's the psychological, there's the emotional abuse, all of these things. And then when you're talking about some physical act, that's just an additional layer on top of it. So you're absolutely correct. And I am incredibly happy that your family did not discount anything that you said because they're our first line of defense. They're our first line of support. We need them to understand what we are saying, what we are going through has traumatized us. I like to look at the whole sexual abuse conversation, or even just any sort of abuse conversation, as when that happens, it becomes part of our DNA. It becomes part of us. We can no longer escape it. It is part of who we are. And like DNA, it can replicate itself in ways we do not understand or even see. And so, for sexual abuse, particularly with children on child sexual abuse, it can impact our how we go to school, with our friends, with our family, with any and every relationship. And certainly for a brother, the men that we grow to become will be directly related to the support we do or do not get. And the impact on society based on the support or lack there more many times means we are going to replicate what happened to us. We're going to do the same thing to other girls and other women. We're going to have negative or not productive relationships with women and girls because we did not get the support. And from my sister's perspective, it impacted relationships that they had with boys, that they did not want anything to do with them because the trauma for what and my mother empowering that meant that, okay, are men not trustworthy? And so there was no support for them at the time as well.
like I've had a very supportive mother and father, and even after my emotionally abusive relationships, I've had trouble trusting men. So I can even imagine if like your mother allowed it and then it was your stepfather, and yeah, it's very hard to trust anybody again after that kind of abuse like happens to you. People don't understand that.
Yeah, unless they've experienced it. And certainly here in the United States, the numbers are staggering when it comes to child sexual abuse. In fact, certainly from a gender standpoint, 1 in 5 children that are sexually abused are boys. So that's 20% that we know of. And on any given day, 160 unique children are sexually abused here in the United States. What that means is today, across the country, 160 children went to school. Some played hopscotch, handball, tetherball. They had recess and lunch with their friends, and then they went home and they played outside after homework, and then they went to sleep. But somewhere around 11 o'clock tonight, 1 o'clock tonight, their door is going to open and someone's going to go in there and abuse. That same thing happened yesterday, at least 160 times here in the United States.
That's
It,
crazy.
it will happen again
160.
tomorrow. And those are the ones that are reported every day.
That's crazy.
It's,
Have you seen Sound of Freedom by any chance?
yes,
First of all, did you like the movie?
yes.
I love that movie. I would probably say I would watch it again, but it's a very tough subject. But I would recommend everybody see that movie. It's amazing. And at the end, it had like real facts about, and it said that the United States was the #1 consumer of child sex. And I'm like, child sexual abuse is horrible and it should never happen to anyone. But is the US really the #1 consumer, or is it the #1 reported consumer?
That's it. You got it. The number one reporting. Because if there's no reporting, that gives anyone else, whoever wants to think about it, freedom to go because there's not going to be any reporting of them. We are the
Yeah,
number one reported. You're absolutely correct.
yeah, because Thailand, it's just accepted there. Some of the stuff in Thailand is they see it happening and they like don't do anything. It's
It is an epidemic, a global epidemic, and has been a global epidemic since the beginning of time. the eroding communication between children who have been sexually abused and everyone else, it just continues to perpetuate, it just continues to grow and go. And so, how do you get children the support you need? And in my case, is how do you get brothers to support? Because once we get the brothers into the conversation, we can close that loop, that family loop, the sibling loop. And someone I look to find and partner with people who could help me figure out what needs to happen. Because my experience is not theoretical, it is a lived experience. And so I use my story so other people can live through us and hopefully find a way out. And oftentimes I'm asked, so what are the first things that you have to do to get on the path of healing? And number one, you have to accept the fact that you are a victim and you are in survivor mode right now. And which is really hard, especially for men and young and boys to admit that we have been sexually abused. I didn't recognize I was sexually abused by my babysitter as sexual abuse until 6 years ago. I had no idea. I never even considered what she was doing to me as sexual abuse until I decided to look it up. Wait a minute, was I being sexually abused? Because that's not something men talk about. We're finding
Yeah.
more and more celebrity men talking about it. So the acceptance of your abuse is job one. And then you can go forward. And then it's about finding that person or persons who you can talk to who will not judge you. Because as people start to judge you, and usually you're talking about this and they would have said, I would have done this, I would have done that. Once again, that's noise. You don't know, as you said, until you have lived it. Like with your experience in your abusive relationship, long distance, people can't tell you what that's unless they have experienced it. They just can't. And so you have to find those people. If they have experience, will at least let you talk, let you share, because the emotional health is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about mental health. We're talking about emotional health, which is inclusive. It's about feelings. It's about shared experience. And when you can have this shared experience, even if it's just someone who's just listening, there is this sense of peace and calm. And you know that you're on the right path. And so that is part of the process. And it's the most important, but it's the scariest one. I'm really curious. When you told your parents what was going on, how long did it take you to get to a place where you felt comfortable that you could tell them?
Oh, they knew what was going on right or wrong because I was like telling them, like, oh, he just said this, he did this,
Mm.
he just, but yeah, the nice thing about living with your parents is they have more of a hold on what's going on, but that's also not hold, but because I'm an adult, but awareness, I guess you could say, of what's going on. And I'm
Mm.
a very open person in general because I struggle with anxiety. And if I don't talk about it, it's not pretty. So I was telling them like right or wrong, and they were supportive, which I was very
You
proud.
are incredibly fortunate that you have parents like that. I had gone on to what I think it was your website, and I saw some of your pictures, and I think there was a picture of you with maybe your mother and your grandmother, I think.
Oh,
Um,
my Instagram, yeah.
yeah, and I saw that, and you can just see there was just a lot of love there, which, as I said, you are incredibly fortunate that you can have these conversations about a very hard subject. It's not easy for certainly men to have these conversations. We are accustomed to, I'm King Kong, I hunt, I do this, and we leave all that other stuff to women, which is weird to me because we all have our male female dynamic working within us. It helps us balance who we are. And for men, it's still very difficult. And yet we have to find a way to make these conversations happen rather.
For being here. Is there anything else you would want to add before we get off here?
I would just like to say, be it you're a man or a woman, boy or a girl, we all ultimately want the same things. We all want to be happy. We all want to be heard. We want to be understood. And we want to move forward with our lives in a positive direction. Do not be afraid to reach out to someone. Don't take 45 years like I did. It makes it very difficult. And claim your space. Be as strong as you possibly can and talk about your trauma. It is releasing. It's empowering.
It is. And where can people follow you on social media?
People can follow me on Instagram, Keeper Catran-Whitney. They can follow me on Keeper Catran-Whitney. Follow me on Facebook, Keeper Catran-Whitney.author is the best place there. There's always my website, Keeper Catran-Whitney, where there's a lot of resources and downloads and chapter reads and all sorts of stuff, trailers and videos and things like that.
Okay, we'll put all those links in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. So that was fascinating, wasn't it? Yeah, I thought that was a really great, insightful conversation. I know it was tough in parts, but I thought that was great. So be sure to follow Keeper on social media using the links in the show notes, and follow me on social media, and we'll put all those links in the show notes. And we will see you guys next episode. Bye, guys.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to follow the show and our guests on social media and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell so you'll get notified when we upload new episodes. See you next time.